Góðan daginn, ég heiti Katrín Elvarsdóttir. On behalf of the Icelandic Photo Festival, I would like to welcome Sasha Wolf. After 10 years of running the Sasha Wolf Gallery in New York, Sasha transitioned to a private model in 2017. Now she represents 16 photographic artists at her private art space, Sasha Wolf Projects. Sasha's book, Photo Work, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice, is now in its third printing. It was published by Aperture in 2019. Additionally, Sasha hosts a popular podcast by the same name. And I was literally listening to her podcast, Photo Work, when she contacted me on Instagram last summer. We started chatting, and one thing led to another, and here we are. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. Iceland is a favorite place of mine, so I'm thrilled to be here. In fact, my good friend Peter Kayafas, who I also represent, whose work you'll see, he and I are going hiking next week up north. So we've combined best of both worlds, getting to spend time with you guys and then going off to the beautiful country. So I'm really very happy to be here. So thank you, Patrine, and everyone who made that possible. Before I get started, I want to say a couple of sort of big overview statements, the most important of which is that everything that I have to say about the art we're going to look at is subjective. So this is just all my opinion, and that's all we can do, right? So these are artists who I love. I represent artists who I love. That doesn't mean that they are artists that you will love. It doesn't even mean that they're artists who you will think are good. The older I've gotten, the more I realize that. I think that for a long time, I thought there were more hard and fast rules about what made good photographs. I'll just stick with photography. And that there was good form or bad form, good use of light, bad use of light, etc. And I believe that less, which doesn't make me any less argumentative or opinionated. But it has made me more open and in some ways just more dedicated to my own passion, to recognizing that the work that I show is my passion. It's what I love. And so with that in mind, I've chosen 5 artists that I represent to show you guys and talk about. One is, we'll start with my newest artist, who I just started working with. We were joking about this last night at dinner, about the pandemic time thing that happens where you start losing sense of how long things have been. But I think I've been working with Rahim for about 6 months. Let's just say 6 months. Don't fact check me. And then I'll have 3 artists I've been working with for a long time, Peter being the longest because he's my oldest friend. And I'm going to end with my second most recent artist that I brought to the roster. Yeah, I'll do my best to explain why I work with these people and why I spend so much of my time working for them. A couple other sort of overview things. I left the gallery life because I didn't like owning a store, which is, in my opinion, no matter what, a gallery, especially in New York City, is a store. It's a store that people are walking in and out of, and that life of being the proprietor of a shop was not for me. There's a lot of things that you have to do, so if any of you have fantasies of opening an art gallery, there's a lot of things that you have to do that have nothing to do with working on art or working with your artists. It has to do with, you know, having a business and dealing with things that come with public space. So I knew that I had built up enough of a reputation that I could transition to a private model. And what that did was it allowed me to write the book, which I did very fast, something I'd wanted to do for a long time. And all of a sudden, my world sort of really opened up for me and gave me time to do what I really love doing, or gave me more time, which is working with my artists on book projects. I mean, I always was known for working very closely with my artists, but it has given me even more time. So it's been an incredible joy, and I will say I'm very lucky because none of my artists left when I closed the public space, and in fact, I've just grown. And my newest artist, Raheem Fortune, I don't want to say there was like a frenzy about who was going to work with him, and I don't know if any of you know his work, but he published a book last year called I Can't Stand to See You Cry that was on the, 10 best lists of a million different places. And a lot of people wanted to work with him, and he came to work with me, which was really wonderful. So it hasn't hurt me that I haven't had the gallery, and that's just been incredibly fortunate because now I get to do everything I really love. So let's get started. So just a quick, this was my favorite gallery space. I just had to throw a picture in. This is, if anyone knows New York City, this is Tribeca. And I did love this space. It was an old converted garage. That was of the different spaces I had, that was the nicest one to go to work in. This is basically part of my private space now. This slide seems cut off. Anyway, you can see my dog. That's the captain of the ship there in the center, Peanut Wolf. And behind there is another big room, and so those are the two spaces and a big, actually, space in the center. So when people come to work, that's where we're working. So the question that most artists want to ask someone like me is a dealer, an art dealer, is what do I look for in a photographer? So the artist should have a point of view. It's always a little weird to be reading the thing you guys are also reading, but that's going to happen a lot today, bear with me. The artist should have a point of view. I don't care if they reinvent the wheel. So this is really important. A lot of my colleagues really care if you reinvent the wheel. Do you guys know that expression, that American expression, reinvent the wheel? So for a lot of my colleagues, that's actually the most important thing when they're looking for new artists. It is their number one preoccupation. Is this person doing something that I've never seen before? That usually has to do with form, the form of the picture. It could have to do with content, but often it has to do with form. I don't care. The only thing I'm looking for is work that I think is excellent. And I tend to fall more on the side of, for most of the time, I find the attempt to reinvent the wheel takes artists away from the kind of authenticity of feeling that I'm interested in. I'm a very emotional person, so I work with artists who are making work that tends to be more emotional and less highly conceptualized, intellectual, sort of didactic work. That is not what I do. So I assume most of you, I hope most of you have a sense of my roster of artists, and so when I say that, you have a sense of what I'm talking about. It's going to become very clear in a second if you don't, but I'm looking for real truth about the artist coming out in their work, their inner life coming out in their work. That's what interests me. The work as a whole should add up to more than the sum of its parts. That's obvious. We're working on bodies of work, not individual images. The work should be comprehensive, inclusive, exhaustive, in-depth. These are all obvious. Cohesive. The images should connect through form, composition, concept, or subject. So Rahim Fortune, who I want to say, because I think it's important, is half African-American and half Chickasaw Indian, and his identity is important to him and to his work. So this body of work is called I Can't Stand to See You Cry. Rahim is extremely sensitive. He's just an incredibly beautiful young man. I say young man because he's young. He's 27 years old, and it's important. His age is important. He still leads very much with his heart. He's sort of an open, in some ways, he's extremely mature for his age, especially when it comes to making art. In other words, there's something innocent about him, unguarded, very open-hearted. He had a difficult childhood. His mother died when he was young. His mother is Native American, Chickasaw. And so he was sort of went back and forth between Oklahoma and Texas, the Chickasaw Nation, and Texas, where his father's family was. His parents are split up. So he had a complex family life, and this body of work is Rahim going back during the pandemic to care for his father who is dying. I Can't Stand to See You Cry is an exploration of Texas and the surrounding states, as well as the people who are fixed within its complex landscape. Fortune analyzes relationships between family, friends, and strangers, all caught in a flood of health and environmental issues, while working to maintain grace. The artist uses his own personal experiences to explore the friction between public and private life and the unspoken tensions in daily life through an approach rooted in the landscape. Moreover, Fortune's autobiographical approach to photography attempts to unpack his own identity and experience in the midst of a pandemic, civil unrest. This was happening during George Floyd, a cross-country move, a career, and the loss of a parent, his father, thinking about both the future and the past. So it's very important to Rahim to give you a sense of where he is. Rahim is a very formal photographer. He's coming from documentary tradition. He's a huge fan of Peter's, and that's been a really lovely thing to find out. I didn't know that when I first started talking to Rahim, and now I've done some matchmaking so that Peter has been nice enough to take Rahim under his wing a bit and work with him on some things. We like to do that. I like to do that at Sasha Wolf projects. I think of it sometimes as like a co-op and putting my artists. I have another artist, Christine Potter, who's helping Rahim also. So, it's just something I'm proud to be able to facilitate. But Rahim has as you'll see, compared to Peter's work, a starker composition. This is the cover of the book, the image that was on the cover of the book that we actually just sold to a couple of institutions. That's Rahim and his girlfriend, Miranda. The thing about this work that struck me and really made me want to work with this guy was how incredibly emotional the work is, how it's so tender. That's the work that, the word that always comes to mind when I'm thinking about Rahim is tenderness. And it's unusual for a young man to be comfortable, sorry, I don't want to offend anyone with this generality, but with this sort of tenderness. I tend to see this more with women artists. Again, this is Rahim's grandmother, the hand on the shoulder. Beautiful composition, closeness. This photograph is called Billy and Minsley, another beautiful picture of people caring for one another. And again, a very, very clean, spare composition. More sense of where we are. We're in Texas. I love the look on the guy in the white shirt. I love the look on his face. I love this picture because it could be tough, but it's not. It's very soft in its way. Rahim is pushing back against stereotypes. Even if you saw Rahim, for some people in the United States, they might see Rahim with his cornrows and think a certain thing about him, and then they would meet this incredibly brilliant, soft-spoken young man. This is Rahim's aunt. Hands, we see hands again. This is a tough picture, important picture in the book. That's Rahim's father. Rahim's father passed away during this project. And of course, again, the hand-holding. It's Rahim's sister. I think her sort of dignity and beauty and poise is important in the context also of this work. Rahim's not afraid to sort of bounce back and forth between the reality of the community, the wider community, and the reality of his family and friends. And I think this picture is very funny. It's a sort of a myth buster, the American West. Billy again. The empty bed. One of my favorite pictures, Rahim getting a haircut with the lens flare that I just think is really beautiful. And again, the touching. That's the book. There's probably a few more copies available, by the way. Get it now. Loose Joints published it, the French publisher. This is a new project in progress. I'm going to show you really quickly. Just want to make the point that Rahim came to me with hundreds and hundreds of pictures, and now we're going through them to figure out what this next body of work is. And so you might think, well, what does that mean? It means that sometimes my artists aren't quite sure, and having someone like me to dump hundreds of images on and have me just do my own edit, which is what I did without Raheem. And then he did his edit, and we compared, and this, we know we are a good match because there was so much overlap. But really, it just gives us the opportunity to start talking about everything from why do I think this is a good image, to what patterns are we seeing. Sometimes it's almost like art therapy. I do this with Peter a lot. We've been doing this for 20 years, trying to figure out if we keep seeing this type of picture repeat, you're probably trying to say something. What is it? What's there that you're trying to say? Sometimes it's just so wonderful when you work this way, when you're going out into the world and making pictures, as opposed to having a hard and fast idea of what you're doing before you go out. Then you sort of know. But when you're going out in the world and you're just making pictures, sometimes it's just incredibly helpful to have someone like me then sit around with you for hours, days, months, trying to make sense of it and talk it out. We're not there yet. We've just started. But it's really thrilling. And this is why I closed the gallery, because it gives me all the time in the world to do this work. And I love doing this work. If I could only do this, I would be happy. Occasionally, I have to actually sell work, but. I mean, again, I think you see this incredible tenderness, especially when it comes to sort of these men and young men. I love this photograph. And I love them, obsessed with them, these friends. There was like 4 variations, so it was incredibly difficult choosing this one. They were all so great. End on him. So I represent a lot of artists that are difficult to sell to individual clients. My individual clients are not buying Raheem's work to put above their couch. So you always have to have balance if you want to sell some more decorative work for those clients. So my artist who best fits that bill is Adam Katzev. And we used to joke when I had the gallery, Adam and I used to joke that Adam single-handedly kept the gallery running. So Adam Katzev's photographs reference subjects both elemental and deeply familiar: fire, land, the night sky, the empty room. Through the use of minimal, subtractive form, Katzev creates images which invite the viewer's imagination to fill in what seems to be missing. In this way, our experience of the work becomes at once universal and deeply personal, an exploration of the line between physical space and our psychological relationship to it. Whether an image emerges slowly from the dark or is dominated by light, these photographs convey a sense of place where past, present, and future are collapsed into a single state of time. Adam works in a very solitary way, does not photograph people at all. His work is very sculptural, formal, aesthetic, quiet, and experimental. This is the work that he's most well known for, the rivers. It was actually, the series is called The Rivers and Falls, and they're quite large. So these are the things you put above your couch, and people walk into your room and go, living room, and go, oh my God. I don't want to in any way diminish the quality of the work by putting it in the category of decorative. Decorative work can be just as rigorous as non-decorative work. And I love Adam, and I have so much respect for his process and the way he works, but it's also easier to sell. Recognize these? Just thought I'd throw in a couple of Icelandic scenes for the audience. His interior series, where he photographed interiors and then he built them as scale models and rephotographed them. Whole night, literally, the shutter was open through the whole night, capturing all the pollution of planes and satellites and light pollution. This is Adam's newest work, Into Color. This is a lake in Maine that he photographed throughout the seasons during the pandemic. And I'm happy to report is selling quite well. Did I miss one? Oh, it's funny, I can't, yeah. Okay, Peter. This guy in the front row.
This is when I get up and leave it.
So we're going to look at his project, The Way West. The Way West presents images from 10 years and thousands of miles of travel in the Plain States. A continuation of his ongoing exploration of the backroads of America, Caiaphas uses his camera to investigate the histories and ritualized traditions of people living in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Colorado. God, the United States is so exhausting. Their way of life and their connection to the land and the animals that comprise their lifeblood are enduring themes. So too is the passage of young people from childhood into adulthood, accumulating experience and knowledge of the struggles and challenges of life in the West. The backdrop for this narrative is the dramatic, rugged, and wide-open landscape of the American West in its layered complexity. So I just want to say, unlike Raheem, who's right now at this point in his life looking inward, photographically, Peter is looking inward, but in a very extroverted, outward way. Peter is very curious about the world and likes to probe all these rituals, what's happening here, what's happening there. Raheem is usually interacting with the people he's photographing. Peter is never interacting with the people he's photographing. Peter comes from the tradition of street photography, where the photographer is just walking through and making the picture. So it's a much more extroverted, confident type of work. It also leads to, at times, more layered and complex frames, which we'll see. I was saying to Peter yesterday that often in these pictures that are more chaotic of his, you can almost pick out more than one sort of subject. You know, there's the obvious sort of subject, and then there's the peripheral characters. And I was saying to him, it's like you think that these kids are really the subject, but maybe the headless father, so dominating. So that's the book. And Peter has a new project that's been going on for a couple of years now. Peter's newest work in progress is based in New England. This is a big deal, which I'll explain, and represents a continuation of his 3-decade engagement with small towns, back roads, and ritualized histories of the United States. This project, which was supported by a 2019 Guggenheim Fellowship, also represents a return to the part of the United States where Peter was born and raised. Peter tried his best to avoid photographing where he was from for decades, but eventually relented and realized that it's funny how some people just want to work, whether they're writers or artists, just want to talk about where they're from, and some people want to get far away. And Peter wanted to get far away photographically for many decades, and so this was a big deal. Coming back home, I love this picture. And you have to think about where Peter is taking this picture. So many photographers would never make this picture. This is not a compliment it's just a fact, because it would be too awkward. I mean, I work with many photographers who would rather shoot themselves than walk over and make this picture. So you have to have a certain amount of, what do you have to have a certain amount of, Peter?
Plead the fifth.
Again, you know, the traditions in the United States, we see these Peter focusing on these very American rituals. Fairs are a big place where Peter photographs. State fairs, county fairs. Hard to know who the subject is in this one. Beautiful picture. Fantastic. Absolutely beautiful. Some of these distinctions are probably, if you're not from the United States, not as easy to pick out from the west to the east. But if you're from the United States, the way people look, the landscape, the architecture is so different. So it's easy to tell. Great photograph. Okay. Brian Skutmott. Brian became very well known with this series, Graze the Mountain Sends, won the Aperture Portfolio Prize. In Graze the Mountain Sends, Skutmott skillfully documents the rugged landscape and people of the great American West. The images describe a series of mining sites and small hardscrabble mountain towns. Also portrayed are the people who have worked in them, built them, and a few younger people who might or might not be looking for a way out of them. It's this balance between the clearly ravaged land and equally devastated faces, with a few moments of youth beauty and the last glimmer of promises never truly fulfilled, that elevates Skutmott's work. His photographs, carefully controlled in both palette and structure, have a true regional twang. They evoke the wear and tear perpetrated on the land, as well as on the psyche of people who live there, with scant separation in one's sense of the individuals and one's sense of the place. Brian is from here, and is from a family that is connected to this whole ravaging of the land. Yeah, goings on, and has spent his photographic career really where he's from, probing and trying to understand and bring to us his thoughts about this place. So Brian is shooting large format, 4:5. The work I love the most and the reason I wanted to work with Brian was because of these portraits, not because of this landscape, which I love, but I've seen many times before. Sorry, Brian. But I really love these tight, shallow depth of field portraits that I felt were very moving given who the subjects are. This is Ralph here and I just find it so moving, this photograph. Old gold mine destroyed the side of the mountain. Very strong color palette in this work, which is very important to me. That's the book. His newer work, Vessels. This is Brian speaking as a project about the American Southwest and its travelers, hitchhikers, and drifters making their way across the altered desert landscape. In America and elsewhere, economic system wears down both people and the landscape. I'm interested in the commonality between the two, how they shape each other. You see that in the other project. Share qualities and reflect the choices we've made in our society. It's obviously shooting in black and white now. This, to me, is one of the best portraits I've seen in a long time. And this is a collaborative way of working. We can easily forget this, right? I mean, he's shooting on a large format camera, so these people are posing for the camera. My last artist I'm going to talk about today is Christine Potter. Christine is an amazing artist, amazing person. Actually, was just with her for a number of days working on the sequencing and editing of this book, which is going to be published in about a year. Christine's a real tactician. She gets an idea and then builds the world. So out of all my artists, she's really combining the sort of what we call post-documentary with conceptual art the most. So, well, I'll read the thing and then I'll explain a bit more. So, what is the resonance or echo of the murder ballad convention in the present day? What attracts us to dead girl songs, or in larger contemporary pop culture, the dead girl trope? And what does this say about our values? If we detour too quickly under mere interest in historic folk traditions, we lose sight of very real links to contemporary statistics of gendered violence and abuse, class, and racial privilege widespread in society today. Perhaps this unspoken connection is the true dark water that Potter's new work swirls within. Her series is an evocative visual way to indirectly speak about darkness, discomfort, and violence in today's moment. Christine, I'm exploring bodies of water that have violent names: Murder Creek, Bloody River, Dead Man's Pond, that kind of thing. In many cases, the provenance of those names has been lost in history. In other cases, they are well documented, usually relate to the violence incurred during the early colonial period. I'm less interested in their specific histories than I am in the sheer preponderance of their existence in the Southeast, which is where she's from, Georgia. It's as if the landscape is marked by our endless violent campaigns. It can be dark and beautiful. There's a tension there that interests me. This body of work is based on the names of those rivers and the murder ballads. In America, we have this tradition of these folk songs that are, you know, you're singing a folk song and it's about, I had to kill Darlene because she'd done me wrong. I took her to the river and drowned her there. This is a sad, sad song. Like that's, you know. So there, I just wrote that on the spot. There are a lot of them. And Christine's from the South, and her husband is a musician. They live in Nashville. And she started just hearing and really becoming more and more aware of these murder ballads, and then created this body of work, Murder Creek, around these ballads. So this is really interesting. So if you told me 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, that I would work with Christine, I would have said probably not, because I tend not to work with artists who are really creating something more, sort of less coming across the world as it is and more coming just out of their head. The balance for me was often different in what I was drawn to. Christine has the most uncanny way of taking an idea like murder ballads and translating it into pictures that make you feel that she has both drawn all this out of herself and completely captured the world as you would recognize it. And I could not work with her. And I think this is one of the most brilliant bodies of work I've seen in years. So there's three sort of types of work. There's the landscape, the situation, as she calls it, and the studio portraits, and these are the girls, the murdered girls. We've been really struggling with captions for the book and how much to say and how much not to say. One of my favorite pictures. And this work's getting a ton of attention now. It's having a bunch of museum shows and the book, as I mentioned. So that's it. Let me just say a few more things, and then if people have questions. It's very important for me that my artists are not competing with each other. So one of the big tricks in sort of having such specific taste like I do and really wanting to work with a certain type of work, what I call more or less post-documentary straight photography, is trying to make sure that each one of your artists is so good at mining their own inner life and bringing that out in an authentic way in the work that they can't actually be too similar because they're two different people. Plus, they have different priorities. So some people of my artists are, as you've seen, extremely concerned with the light. And maybe Christine Potter. maybe obsessed with light, and she does a lot of crazy stuff. So a lot of these pictures were shot on color film. She's also shooting large format, and then she reverses certain values so that they're particularly disorienting. There you go. So, you know, she's not only, and that's what I meant when I said she was a great tactician, she's not only telling this story, she's going in there and driving herself crazy, because, by the way, when you do that, you then you have to scan your negative. Now you're working on the computer, and then she outputs a new negative, a new black and white negative. I mean, it's so labor intensive, it's incredibly expensive, it's so time consuming. But so some people are really concerned with one thing, other artists are really concerned with other things, personal, political, form, whatever form means to them. My job is to help them, to facilitate, make sure that the best of what they want to do comes out. And then find that balance between what they want to say, what they're trying to say, with how it's going to be received by us. You know, that's a common conversation. How important is it to you? Christina and I just talked about this over and over and over again. How important is it to you that your viewer understand that thing you just said? That's an incredibly important thing, and we'll talk about that over and over and over again. Anyway, thank you guys very much. I don't know, we're leaving it on this guy. It's a little intimidating. Wait.
You seem to focus a lot on the American view.
Yeah.
New York is a pretty international place.
Yeah.
Was that a decision that you made because as somebody that spent time in rural Oklahoma,
Yeah.
you know, I really resonate with those images
Yeah.
from those places. But for others, they don't connect at all.
Yes.
Because they can't feel that ceiling fan spinning in the air
Right.
when they see it.
Yeah.
How do you translate that?
I mean, I think that's a thing, no matter what, that you can't get away from. So, you know, my program is extremely America-centric. I represent an artist, or most of the work is in New York, actually two, Gus Powell and Paul McDonough. But my program, and this is something I've really struggled with, but there's a learning curve for me looking at work from Oklahoma. There are references I do not understand. There's always references I don't understand if it's not the Upper West Side of New York City where I grew up. There's just always references I don't get. And so at a certain point, you know, I decided to just not spread myself too thin and try and understand my country. And that's not to say that I wouldn't work with someone who wasn't American. I work with Sasha Rodensky, who's not, I mean, her family immigrated to the United States when she was 10, but most of her work takes place where she's from, which is Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. And I have worked with German photographer, 2 German photographers, but right now it's very America-centric, and I just realized that I just have so much to learn about my own country. So I represent a number of Black American photographers, and there are references in their work that I don't understand. It's just different culture. And I really love sitting down and having them explain to me what that means in the Black community. But, so I just feel right now really happy with where I am, and I feel really relieved to have let go of that need to represent everyone, because I just can't. And so I'm very, right now I just feel, first of all, my country has gone bonkers, and so I want to understand that as much as I can also. And it helps to be looking at these pictures and trying to feel connected to people who maybe don't have the same politics I do. So a lot of this is personal. My work is personal to me as anyone else's work is to them. And just because it's not my photographs, it's incredibly personal to me. How do I want to spend my time? You know, it's like to be able to spend my time looking at pictures where I'm learning, I'm learning is an incredible thing. It's not just that I'm helping Raheem do a good edit, but I'm learning about what this church ritual in Texas or Oklahoma means in the Black community. And that's how I want to spend my time right now. You know, so, I mean, I worked too hard to get to where I am to do anything other than work on the things that really make me feel like I'm the best I can be and that I'm growing as much as I can and that I'm not bored, you know. So I hope that answers that. Anyone else? Because I could just keep answering that question if there's no... Yeah.
I have a question around representation, which is that I love to hear you talk about how personal your work is, but I also know that part of being a gallery, especially a super fancy gallery, is who the work gets shown to and things like that. And I'm curious about how you and the artists you work with navigate that, when it seems like a lot of the artists you're working with are photographing people who 100% not go into your gallery or buy a photograph. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, yeah. We talk about this all the time. The art world is a very strange place. I mean, another reason I left the gallery world is because I don't like it. It makes me uncomfortable. I don't feel at home there. I think there's too much of it that doesn't share my values. I mean, you know, I don't do this work as a salesperson. And it's not my get-rich-quick idea. You know, I do the work because I love working with photography and I love working with artists. But there's a lot of the art world that is very much about commerce. I'm not sure that art and commerce should have anything to do with each other. You know, I tell art students all the time to not think about money. Like, it shouldn't have anything to do with it. But there are just certain realities. There's a structure that's been set up, and I can do my best to break some of the rules or bend some of the rules, and I do. But I can't blow the whole thing up. So I like to try from time to time, but working the way I work does allow me to get outside of that worst part of it. And one of the ways that I'm able to do that is, I would say at this point that the majority of work I sell goes to museums, where it's going to be seen by anyone who goes to a museum. And it's up to the museum to do outreach to the communities. And they do. I mean, a lot of the museums I work with work really, really hard to make sure that local and, you know, underserved communities are going to those museums and seeing themselves in the pictures. So I would say it's hard to, I would say over the past few years that probably 70% of the work I've sold is going to institutions, which is exactly what I wanted. And I love my clients who want to put a huge Adam Katzif over their couch. Like, that's great. I'm grateful to anyone who wants to spend money with me and support one of my artists because they have so many choices. But I'm with you. It's not as satisfying as knowing that the work is going to go to the Los Angeles County Museum of Art and they're going to put it up in one of their adjunct buildings next to 5 public schools. That's preferred. So, you know, you do the best you can to work within a very strange structure. But right now I have the freedom to sort of get away from the parts that are unpleasant. But they are unpleasant. It's just when money becomes part of anything, it gets tainted. Did I answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
I think we have time for one quick question.
Have you ever made any totally unexpected discoveries of new talent? I think of the discovery of Vivian Maier a few years ago.
Yeah. I haven't had a Vivian Maier experience. You know, for me, Raheem was, you know, I didn't know who Raheem was, and one of my other artists called me up and said, "You're not going to believe this. I want you to look at this," and I did, and my mind, you know, just, I was like, holy cow. And I called Raheem, I reached out to Raheem and I said, "I just saw your work. Doug Dubois, just another artist of mine, just showed me your work, and I'd love to have you over for a cup of coffee." And so, you know, that happens. That's how I find artists, is one of my other artists or one of my other colleagues calls me up and says, "You have to look at this." I mean, I'm always looking, by the way. It's not that I'm not, I'm always looking. But often it's something like that. But I haven't discovered the, I'm scared of those things, first of all, because I'm sure there's some Vivian Maier lawsuit going on right now. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you, thank you. My fugue state at one point.
What's your fugue state?
Where I just, it's no use, like I'm on another planet.